This is a silly little chorus to start us off. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open yourself to the song. Open yourself to the song. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Don't be afraid of some change. Don't be afraid of some change. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. All right. God, we're grateful for this new day that you've given to us. We're grateful for the joy that you place within our hearts. We're grateful that we have courage and excitement when you talk to us about changing everything in our lives. We look forward to what you have in store for us today by your Holy Spirit. We pray in your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. We have got...
What page are we on?
We have got today and next week, and then we will be jointly taking a sabbatical from Bible study for the summer and start back up in, we'll start back up in September.
80.
We're starting on 80,
80?
page 80. Page 80 in our
My
books.
granddaughter gave me 2 bookmarks for Mother's Day. You want this one?
No, I have plenty of.
Oh, you do? Okay.
All right. This is Henry Nouwen, bringing solitude into our lives. Let's read a little bit about him in our introduction here today. Henry Nouwen, born 1932, died in 1996. So we have a contemporary here, different. I think the last one we read was from 300. So this is
That's why I said,
He lived while I lived.
skipping around.
So he was born in Holland, and he came to the United States in 1964. So he was 32 years old when he moved to the United States. He was a Roman Catholic priest, a psychologist, and he taught several prestigious universities, including Yale, Harvard, and Notre Dame. He wrote over 20 books, and his spiritual pilgrimage brought him to serve the mentally handicapped in this international network of communities. After spending 1 year in France, he was at Daybreak in Richmond Hills, Ontario, Canada from 86 until his death. At Larch Home, the mentally handicapped and their assistants live together as God's children trying to enflesh the gospel. Assistants provide basic care for their charges, cooking, cleaning, and encouraging and prayer. Henry Nouwen's spiritual sensitivity is refreshing and prophetic. The following selections invite us to intimacy and invite us to the spiritual life. So I am a little familiar with him. Some of his books were required reading in seminary, relating a lot to pastoral care and the spiritual life. I think we'll find some of his insights will be easily accessible and understandable for us because he's a contemporary of ours.
I was born before him. That's hard to do.
He's the old historical figure.
Whoa. And he wrote 20 books.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? Some people really what they do with their time.
Yeah.
So this is taken from one of his books called Making All Things New. We'll start with number 1, hard work. The spiritual life is a gift. It is the gift of the Holy Spirit who lifts us up into the kingdom of God's love. But to say that being lifted up into the kingdom of love is a divine gift does not mean that we wait passively until the gift is offered to us. Jesus tells us to set our hearts on the kingdom. Setting our hearts on something involves not only serious aspiration, but also strong determination. A spiritual life requires human effort. It forces that the forces that keep pulling us back into a worry-filled life are far from easy to overcome. How hard it is, Jesus exclaims, to enter the kingdom of God. And to convince us of the need for hard work, he says, if anyone wants to be a follower of mine, let him renounce himself and take up his cross and follow me. All right, so the spiritual life, I think that topic, that phrase is worth us talking about. Its connection to the kingdom of God is worth us talking about. And then why is it hard? All good things for us to talk about. So what is the spiritual life? In some ways, the spiritual life is very different from everyday life. And in other ways, I think once we enter into a spiritual life, we kind of come to realize that that's really the only life, and that the rest is an illusion or a distraction or something like that. So I think before we're introduced to this new way of living and perceiving, we think life is a certain way. And then this is where we would say we can have a born-again experience. That's a phrase that's used by a lot of Christians. That's taken from Jesus meeting with Nicodemus. It's so radically different that it's like you started over. It's like a clean slate. It's like a brand new way of living and seeing life, right? So get ready with your page number because Sybil's coming in.
I have it.
Okay, good. So in some ways, the spiritual life, totally new, totally different, almost foreign, almost like this wow epiphany. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you. So the spiritual life can seem like a new thing, a different thing, but then once you're in it, you realize this is how God created this thing to be. And it can be very different. So then we also might find ourselves realizing that just because this new life is, this gift, like he mentions, this revelation, this thing that we never could create on our own, we were born into this new thing. We still have to kind of work to stay there because we have a pull into the other way. So I think sometimes we describe the pull back to a different way of living in two different ways. One of them is we consider it to be sinful, or we consider it to be evil or deceptive, being pulled back into the old way of thinking. We find ourselves sometimes, we realize, I'm struggling to to live in this, in the now. I'm struggling to live in this kingdom of God. I'm struggling to live feeling that I'm in close relationship with God and that God is with me and all that. Sometimes we don't feel that way. And so one of the ways we describe it is it's sinful. We're going back to like a rebellious way of living or thinking. Like it's like we're entering into this place where we're doing things against God. Right? So that's one of the ways we describe it. We talk about our challenges as being temptations. I'm tempted to lie. I'm tempted to steal and cheat. I'm tempted to just not be honest. I'm tempted to try to control my life and even maybe control the lives of people around me. So I'm tempted to do things that I know are not going to be good for me. And we think of that temptation as being like an evil pull. Another way that I think we can look at it is it's like being pulled into a less mature way of living or a more childish way of living. So it's like we don't want to grow up. We want to go back to the old days. So that's a pull that's not necessarily evil. It's just like we get tired of the work and we get tired of growing older and we find ourselves, just because we're working so hard, we need rest. We need to refocus and things like that. So I think some of the struggles that we face are against evil forces, so to speak, or against a part of us that wants to do the wrong thing. But then there's another part of us that's honestly, we're not really trying to do the wrong thing. We're simply tired and overworked, and we have progressed. And sometimes, let me use this example. So I taught swimming lessons for a number of years, right? And so when you're teaching swimming lessons, you're trying to help a student learn the best way to do a certain stroke, right? And there can be bad, if you learned how to swim just by somebody throwing you in the lake, or you learned just you didn't learn in a formal way, you can learn how to swim with bad habits. So for example, the bad way to swim is with your head out of the water all the time and doing this, all right? And you don't want to put your face in the water, so you're just like this. So that you can stay on top of the water and not drown, so that's good, right? So you learn how to swim, great. Now, when you're taking lessons, let's learn a better way, all right? The better way means you actually need to put your face in the water, and that's hard to do. It's scary because you can't breathe under there. So you have to learn how to exhale under the water and inhale above the water, and it's actually not like this, but it's like this. So you're exhale, inhale, like that, right? Now, along the way, as you're learning, you might find yourself slipping into those bad habits. And it's like your arm position, or when you're doing head up, your whole body goes like this. So you're not gliding on top of the water. So I remember with students, it's like, think of whatever your head does, the rest of your body's going to do. So a student could go 3/4 of the way across the pool doing great, and then they get toward the end of the pool, and then their body starts sinking like this, and they start putting their head up again. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not doing the wrong thing in terms of like being evil or bad. There's just better ways to do things. Same with relationships, right? We can have relationships at like a 12-year-old level of friendship, right? But if we're 25 years old and we're relating to our friends as 12-year-olds do, there's a better way, right? There's a better way. So we don't necessarily talk about our feelings and and deeper things when we're 12 like we do when we're 25, right? So some of this hard work is resisting temptation to do the wrong thing. But I think more often than not, it is a temptation to go back into less mature ways of living. And so we just have to keep reminding ourselves. Sometimes we're still in that transitional phase of we haven't quite fully made the jump in one area of our life. We might find that we're starting to practice forgiveness. Sometimes if we haven't learned from the very beginning, learning how to say I'm sorry is hard, like really hard. So at the beginning, you might have to be very intentional about it, and you have to like work up the nerve to do it and choose the right words and choose your moment and say I'm sorry, and then try not to overreact when you don't get the response that you're looking for when you say I'm sorry and things like that. So it's like a big deal, right? But after a while of not holding on to things so much, I'm sorry becomes much easier to do. And we don't get anxiety about it. So in the process, we have to deal with, well, some days it's easy and then some days it's not easy. We haven't fully made the transition there, you know?
I feel like this hard work, I realize doesn't mean before you retire, but when I was working, I lived a frantic life. I had deadlines 10, 20 times a day. I had a home and children, and I was an active elder, and I was so overloaded and I sometimes need to be at peace to hear what the more enlightened information. Talks about that in the next.
Yeah.
But I also found that when I was working, I had a lot more opportunities to apply what Christ would want me to learn.
Yeah.
Now, it's pretty easy. And I have to add, sometimes I feel guilty because I talk about the struggles between my husband and I.
Oh.
And it's not because he's a bad person, but because at 65 years old, after 65 years of marriage, you need to perfect it a little more to keep it interesting.
Sure.
He and I are really very similar in attitude, but very opposite in personality, which made us work together well. But there's still a lot, and it's amazing as I just put my mind on what I would like, it happens. In fact, that reminds me of Jesus said to the guy who sat at the pool, he said, do you want to be healed? A lot of my life, I haven't even thought about wanting to be healed. I just keep thinking about what's got to be done different.
So every stage of life definitely has its own particular challenges. Interesting, I just read something maybe yesterday that when we choose a spouse or a mate, we actually use our sense of smell and are attracted to people whose immune systems are the opposite of ours. And they're saying that's like an evolutionary development where we are attracted to the opposite of us.
Yes.
And what that does is that helps to increase our own immune system. Now you can take that a little further metaphorically or psychologically and say we are attracted to people that are very different than us because we know that if we're with somebody that's different than us, it can help to round us out.
That's right.
Because
exactly
we're not going to be as full as we could be if we don't have somebody who's really good at pointing out either overtly or other ways what our shortcomings are, and we'll do the same to them. Because when we're drawn to people that are different than us, we can very clearly see what their problems are, and they can very clearly see what our problems are. And we can't see our own problems, and they can't see their own problems. So we try to help each other, but we try to do it's the whole truth and love thing, where it's like this is a prime opportunity for two people to both improve their lives. But at the same time, if you let it get out of hand, it feels like you're with the person that's going to destroy you, because they're just like
After a while.
Because we have to face ourselves when we're with somebody that's
he
different
tries
than
to-
us.
His dad always tried to perfect his mother, so he thinks that's a husband's job. But I told him about, maybe even 20 years ago, I said, pretty soon you're going to perfect me so much I'm going to be too good for you.
Ooh, yeah.
We laughed
Yeah.
about that, but he now realizes he has to back off.
Sure. Well, you have to help one another at a sustainable pace.
Because men,
You know what I mean?
Men don't get clues. You got to tell
It's
them.
like if you're gonna go to the gym and work out, you don't start with 1,000 pounds. You know,
Yeah.
you start light and you work your way up. So,
People learn how to compensate, though.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about swimming. I had 3 sons. The rule at the pool was you had to learn you had to cross or up and down, whatever, before you could get credited. The 2 older boys did that fine. The youngest one came right after him, got halfway through, went down, pushed himself up, and kept going. He was going to get this.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to interrupt your flow here, except that this last sentence, I feel I watch Christian women especially. It says, let you renounce yourself and take up his cross and follow me. And I feel like too many people, especially women, misunderstand that. I think it means to give up your ego. It doesn't mean that you should be subservient to everybody else. And I think that's a flaw in the history of women. Women aren't doing that so much anymore, but in the history of women, denying themselves, thinking that that was what God wanted.
Absolutely. And this is one of those. One of the things that we're going through is when we have a spiritual life and we're being transformed into a more Christ-like person, we are also being transformed into our true self. And my true self and your true self is unique because it includes our personality and our experience. But we're trying to be, the word authentic is really good. We're trying to be true and authentic to who we really are. And so when we say renounce yourself, that is, we shouldn't take that phrase lightly. We should examine that phrase
That's
deeply, right? Because the question really is, that we keep coming back to, is who are we really? Really, who are we? So there are certain personality traits that we might give to ourselves or we might assign to another person. For example, we might say, oh, well, I have a little bit of a temper. That's just who I am, right? Okay, so there's probably a part of that is probably accurate, but to think that you have this essential characteristic that makes you angry is not really probably the healthiest way to view yourself. There's probably some people, you know, you've got like type A and type B personalities, assertive and passive. So that doesn't mean that one is better than the other. That doesn't mean that one is more right or more Christ-like than the other. There are just different personalities that are more kind of assertive leader type and some that are more like team player like. And we need to have both types of people within our families and our communities and stuff like that, because it's not going to work if everybody's assertive or everybody's passive. We're not going to function as a group well if we do that. So assertive could become, oh, this person has a temper, because when things don't go their way, they use this outburst either to control things, or they're so frustrated that they're not using the skill or the practice to kind of step back and count to 10 and calm down before you keep going, right? So you can still have this something inside of you, like to be a very driven person, but if that turns you into a jerk, that's not a good thing, right? So you can be an assertive, Christ-like person. If we didn't have assertive, Christ-like people, probably the church would not have grown like it did. You know, there were probably a lot of people, maybe not everybody, but there were probably a lot of people that were like, let's get this job done. There's other people that are on the passive side, and the passive side doesn't mean that you don't have an opinion, and it doesn't mean that you don't have a point of view that is important to share. It means maybe there's some flexibility in the timing that you choose to share your input, and we wouldn't want a more passive kind of characteristic to turn into something negative, like that a person feels like they're a victim all the time, right? So there is a positive quality of being passive where you can bring patience and insight into a situation that's going to be very helpful, and to learn how to do that in a way where you don't just let people step all over you, kind of like what you were talking about, is important. So we know ourselves, and we could say, well, like I'm on the more passive side, or whatever term we want to use, but hopefully I'm a healthy version of that. My goal is to be the healthiest version of that possible. So we can be healthy versions of all these different characteristics. We don't want to be the unhealthy version of those characteristics, you know?
Right.
I don't want to be a jerk, or I don't want to be like just a depressed lump off to the side, you know?
I'd like to throw a little example in here. When Lila's with her mother, she tends to, I call it whine, but she's at school, and in the Sunday school, she's not like that. But anyways, she came to church a couple of weeks ago. She had a baseball cap on and blue jeans and tennis shoes and a short skirt or midriff showing. She said, and her mom said, well, today she dressed like a boy. Every now and then she dresses like a boy. And she says, today I'm a boy. I'm going to say I'm not crying. I'm going to say everything's okay, going to be okay. And I thought, to me, that was like a 5-year-old hearing Christ try to help her define herself in a more grounded way.
Yeah,
That
sure.
may be grandma, but
No, that's good. That's good. And that's kind of like going back to the opposites attract thing. Sometimes the thing that will help us to become a healthy version of ourselves is to observe and to have the experience of being around somebody whose personality is very different than us. A passive person might be inspired by the energy and the assertiveness of a type A personality. A type A personality might be encouraged by the more laid back and peaceful passive type of a person. I had a friend, my probably best friend in seminary was a type A extrovert, knew everybody in a very short period of time on campus, and I was the sidekick, you know? But I knew that he needed me just as much as I needed him. And when we were together, we enjoyed our time together, and he was able to kind of become a better version of himself by being around me, and me by being around him. So these things help us. And what we're renouncing is that the unhealthy aspect, that's one thing that we renounce. But I think there's also something else that is even beyond that, and this is for everybody, and this is the idea. This verse is along the lines of Paul's statement. It's no longer, I think it's in Galatians, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And so this is an identity that is honestly, it's beyond personality. It's beyond our individual experience. and it is an identity that ties us into the divine. It ties us into Christ. It ties us into God. And it means we are a child of God. We are the offspring of God. We are an expression. We are a divine expression. That is who we are. I'm not some isolated, independent thing or person that has an existence apart from God. Nothing and nobody has existence apart from God. And so that's one of the things that we also have to come to terms with, is that I do not exist on my own. It's like me thinking that I could exist without air and without water and without ground to stand on. I can't exist without that. I am tied to this earth to exist. If I don't have the sunshine, I will die. If I don't have water and food, I will die. If I don't have air to breathe, I will die. I cannot exist without this world that is around me. So for me to think that I'm this individual existence apart from those things is a little crazy. But we do it. It's easy for us to think of ourselves as this independent floating thing. We even think of eternity as our soul. It's my soul. It's my little piece of me floating around all by myself. And it's like, no, if we're not tied to God, we have no being. We do not exist. And so even the broken things of this life and even the evil things of this life, they're still drawing life from God and cannot separate themselves from God until God says otherwise. I think it's in the book of John where Jesus describes this age as something that it's essentially God is allowing things to happen until they play themselves out in their fullness. And some things appear to be isolated and separate from God, but everything is connected to God. So for us to think that we are ourselves without God, this is what we need to renounce. We need to renounce our individual identity. And we just need to say, like Paul does, Paul gets it. He says, I don't live anymore. The good me and the bad me that I gave up to become the good me, now I give up the good me, and it's not me, it's Christ. And that's a very different, this is kind of the next level. Not a lot of us kind of get this part.
Paul taught me to not say Holy Spirit because that's vague. I define Christ. I try to think of Christ in you, the hope of glory. So, while we're getting our waiting to our car washed, another guy was waiting there, and he wanted to argue politics. And I had to see Christ in him, the hope of glory, in order to not just fight with him.
Sure.
And I felt like I kept finding commonalities, even though he really thought for sure, since I was talking differently than him, I couldn't be a good person. But at the end, I think he was sorry to see me go.
But it took a lot of thinking, a lot of praying to figure out. There are so many people that don't have that, because they act so, and you think to yourself, how can they be like that? And then you realize they don't have God, they don't have Jesus, they don't have what we have.
Right.
So they act however they want,
right.
Mean or
right.
And then you have to look at them and
And
go, yeah,
scolding them
same
doesn't
thing.
work. You just drive them deeper away.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, the thing, it's like sometimes you can say, oh, that's a broken person. And it helps to have a little empathy. That's a broken person. And when you're really broken, you're not yourself. And you act out in stupid ways. Mm-hmm. So there's also immature. You can look at a person and say, Now, there's an 80-year-old child right there. Sometimes there's this maturity level that's just like you're like, how in the world did you live for so long and not grow up some, So there's that. And then there's other times where you're just baffled and you say, it can't be brokenness, it can't be immaturity. It's just like, this person is like gone. Like, how do you act like that? It's almost like a person has renounced their humanity. They're just,
Ooh.
you know what I mean?
Oh, I know.
Yeah. So a lot of things can do that. There can be, we've gone through the whole 12-step thing. So a lot of times it is like this severe addiction to things. Sometimes it's chemicals, sometimes it's behaviors, sometimes it is literally a mental illness. There's a lot of things that can make somebody just
I feel
seem
like
to be outside the realm of just regular humanity,
I felt like he acted like he might have recently gotten a divorce and he was still angry at women. Because there was the start of it.
Right.
Or,
When we are broken, we really are. If you think about a wounded animal, if you try to approach a wounded animal to try to help them, there's people that will rescue animals to try to rehabilitate. That's probably the most dangerous thing to do, because there's just this irrational thrashing about. And usually it's done as a means of self-protection, because a person is they may not acknowledge it or admit it, they're in so much pain that they will just overreact to every circumstance around them, because what they're trying to do is to push away further pain. And it's very difficult to find the exact moment and method of presenting some kind of a help to a person to get them
he sure
through
didn't want
that.
to ask for help, because he wanted to talk real bad, but he wanted it more like to tell me what lousy people from Illinois. He finally got out. He was from Ohio, so I'm
Right.
from Illinois. Yeah, that's what's wrong with you. It's
Right.
It's that wanting to, but after a while,
Right.
he was relaxed.
Right.
Good job.
Yeah. We cannot change other people. It's hard enough to change ourselves.
That's right.
And,
that's harder.
And the thing is, the people that really go through genuine transformation, what happens is they wake up. They experience a revelation. They take responsibility for the change in their lives. And it's the only way. We can be an encouragement, but it takes wisdom to know how to be an encouragement. Sometimes pointing out another person's faults is helpful. Sometimes it's the exact opposite of helpful. Sometimes giving advice is helpful, and sometimes giving advice is not met with cooperation or appreciation.
You have to want to be healed.
Mm-hmm.
If
You
you're
have
to.
happy in the groveling.
It's back to the 12 steps. It's this acknowledgement that I'm powerless, I'm broken, and I need something that I don't have, much bigger than me, to come in and help that. So this is again what we renounce. We renounce the part of ourselves that is trying to fix the brokenness, and we can't do it. We can't heal ourselves. So we have to give up, and we have to take up this way of the cross that leads to, because the way of the cross leads to new life. We often look at the cross as no pain, no gain, or it's like we have to suffer. And sometimes the suffering is like we deserve it or something like that, we look at the cross as an end in itself, when the cross is not an end in itself. The cross is the thing that gets us to the resurrection. It's like we can't be a new person until the old person dies. And we don't want to die. We've got this thing inside of ourselves that wants to survive and wants to keep. So this is where our ego will thrash about like it's drowning, and will resist dying at all costs. And we have to let ourselves, our ego, we have to let it die in order to experience this new thing. All right, let's jump to the next. A small, gentle voice. Here we touch the question of discipline in the spiritual life. A spiritual life without discipline is impossible. Discipline is the other side of discipleship. The practice of a spiritual discipline makes us more sensitive to the small, gentle voice of God. The prophet Elijah did not encounter God in the mighty wind or in the earthquake or in the fire, but in the small voice. Through the practice of spiritual discipline, we become attentive to that small voice and willing to respond when we hear it.
I think this is referring also to what we have here. I've noticed in Bible studies, or sometimes I've been in where they call them growth groups or book studies. If they're too adrenaline based, we don't seem to get anywhere. The leader hopefully can have a mellow, relaxed tone that helps people to see where they really are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes we do experience God in the mighty wind or the earthquake. Sometimes we do. It's not that God does not choose that. It's that there are different approaches to the transformation we need to go through. And sometimes, like the mighty wind or the earthquake would be the example of the Apostle Paul getting thrown from his horse and being struck blind for 3 days. That's the mighty wind and the earthquake. That's the God getting your attention. This is like in support groups, this would be hitting bottom. This is life slapping you in the face and kicking you around. This is the wake-up call, right? So to speak. And sometimes we need those, and sometimes that is a way of God communicating with us. But that is not an experience of the type of surrender that God is looking for in other ways. So this is like Job. I'm sorry. This is like Jacob fighting it's either God or the angel at night. It is a battle of wills, my will against God's will. And it's back and forth and back and forth. And finally you realize I'm not going to win. And so you're like, I give up. Or you give up because he's got you in a headlock and he's going to choke you out. And then it's like, I give up. But you didn't give up without a fight, right? You fought and fought and fought until you realized you were going to lose, and then you gave up. That's the mighty wind and the earthquake.
That's Jacob.
That's Jacob fighting God and wrestling with God.
Always limped after that.
The still small voice is when we can see things clearly and willingly and with full heart give ourselves to God. And then we can hear God's whisper. Because it's if you think of it this way, if God did anything other than whisper, it would be an unfair fight. Right? So this is this beautiful, tender, intimate moment of surrender where we acknowledge the power of God and we give ourselves to God, and then God answers back. And the whisper, we only need a whisper to be just as transformed or even more than getting knocked off a horse or wrestling with God all night long. So this is part of the discipline that he's talking about. When we think of discipline, it's almost like we're in this pattern of trying to surrender to God. We're trying to cooperate with God. We're putting in the effort for that in order to hear and listen. So that's one of the ways that we can experience God in our spiritual life. All right, let's do the next one, number 3. From an absurd to an obedient life. From all that I said about our worried, overfilled lives, it's clear that we are usually surrounded by so much outer noise that it is hard to truly hear our God when He is speaking to us. We have often become deaf, unable to know God when God calls us, unable to understand in which direction He calls us. Thus our lives have become absurd. In the word absurd, we find the Latin word surdus, which means deaf. A spiritual life requires discipline because we need to learn to listen to God who constantly speaks, but whom we seldom hear. When, however, we learn to listen, our lives become obedient lives. The word obedient comes from the Latin audire, which means listening. A spiritual life is necessary in order to move slowly from an absurd to an obedient life, from a life filled with noisy worries to a life where there is some free inner space where we can listen to our God and follow His guidance. Jesus' life was a life of obedience. He was always listening to the Father, always attentive to His voice, always alert to His directions. Jesus was all ear. That is true prayer, being all ear for God. The core of all prayer is indeed listening, obediently standing in the presence of God. So
this is underscored with that book I read that the church gave us when we joined the church. Jesus is calling me in prayer as listening.
Right. The noise, I'm thinking about his life, our author's life ended in 1996. That's just right around the time that the internet became a phenomenon. And just think about how different life is the past 30 years with the invention of the internet. Along with that came cell phones, and this noise that he talks about is like exponentially louder probably now than it was at the end of his life in the mid-90s. And we thought the mid-90s was kind of loud and chaotic in comparison to the previous 20 years. So it's just, our society is louder and louder. There's more distractions. And the discipline is to limit our engagement with the noise. And sometimes the noise is fun. It's fine. It's fun. It's exciting. It is, we can find a lot of purpose in this outer world. But if we don't make a consistent routine of disconnecting ourselves from all the noise, good or bad, to hear the voice of God, we're going to live a very different life. I don't think we can have a life of surrender in the noise. How do you surrender in the noise? Because the noise gets our attention, and the noise prompts us to feel and to think and to act. And the noise is not just audible, but it's this constant vying for our attention and for our input and for our response. That's the noise. The quiet is actually like, it's almost like looked down on in our society, that somebody would completely disengage and just be quiet. It's like, what's wrong with them?
Yeah.
But it's in this quiet that we find a balance, and we can hear the voice of God where we can't
You know what
otherwise.
I found in the last 30 years that is so very different? Speed. They want everything has to be faster, faster, faster. No, what it is, not fast enough.
Yeah,
It's a big difference.
yeah,
There's a big difference.
yeah. You have to get the job done faster.
Everything.
You have to get from point A to point B faster. A lot of it is fueled by competition. You have to be faster than the other guy, so you have to finish your work faster. You have to, so yeah, it is. It feels like the louder the noise and the faster the pace, it's like we're speeding to the edge of a cliff or something.
I don't have
you know?
the time to think about what they said.
Yeah,
They're onto something else.
right.
This is really bothering me.
Yeah, yeah.
I like to think about things a little bit more
Yeah.
than,
Right. So in a way, a disciplined life, if you're going to engage and keep the noise down, you're going to have to constantly make an effort to bring balance. It means being able to say no. It means to say no to other people, and it means to say no to ourselves. So, I'm amazed. Like going through COVID really made me realize how dependent I am on restaurants. And it's like, that was like a big deal, the keeping the restaurants alive. That was a big deal during the COVID years, right? And it's like the lifestyle that I grew up in, for the first 20 years of my life, we hardly ever ate out.
Oh, yeah.
It was
maybe
like
once.
you went out to eat for somebody's birthday or something
It's
like that.
occasion.
You always eat at home, or you take your lunch with you. That's just one example of the pace of life you're talking about. It's like, I don't have time to fix a lunch and take it with me. The reality is ridiculous. The reality is, what are you saving, a couple minutes? And then if you look at the whole, if you look at choosing one way of living or the other, you're probably going to live a whole lot longer if you eat food from your own house than if you just constantly are eating stuff that's prepared for you in a way that's just, it's designed for flavor only. It's just packed full of things that we don't need. And then on top of that, now it's like insanely expensive. And I ask myself every time that I go to a place to eat and I sign the bill, I'm like, what are we doing? We're like, but it's just, it's easy to get caught up into the noise and the pace and so it really does take discipline to fight against that, a pattern of living that we know does not end where we want it to end. There are better ways.
I know what Elaine means, because once in a while you have to go on the telephone and talk to someone about something. And a lot of young people, I was one of them when I was young, talk too fast. And I don't want to be mean to them, so I finally have gotten, so I say, I'm sorry, but I'm older and I can't listen as fast as you can talk.
Oh, I like
I've
that.
only
Yeah.
had one person who English you could tell was a second language who didn't like it that I told him to slow down, because she kept going fast and I could never understand what she was saying.
Right.
And I always say, I'm sorry, I just can't hear you.
Yeah.
Could you say that again
Yeah.
slower?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it's when I was young I talked fast. People always tell me slow down.
Right.
I actually have to slow people down in the phone because it's coming in on a screen.
Oh.
And the screen makes a lot of mistakes, number one.
Oh.
And you can't keep up with it. So you have to tell people to slow down.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I know exactly what that's all about.
So some of this noise is speed. Some of this noise is, it's just not necessary for us to do so much.
That's right.
Sometimes we just don't need to do that much. It does, at the end of the day, it is not a net benefit for us to do so much. So we need to learn to pace ourselves. And I've had to, just in my job as a pastor, like there's always tons of stuff to do. If I wanted to, I could work 80 hours a week because there's work to do. But the thing is, like, that's not going to benefit anybody if I decide to work in a way that's not sustainable. And the same for any other job. If you work at a pace that's not sustainable, it's not going to benefit anybody. So the discipline almost is, I've had to slow myself down and feel guilty, and I feel like I should be working more.
Absolutely.
And but then fortunately there's another part of me that says it's just feel guilty, it's just a feeling. You need to still do the right thing, and you need to pace yourself, and you need to kind of like, and then I have to prepare myself to tell the other part of me that's resisting is like, you're doing it the right way. Don't listen to what other people say, including yourself. Do what you know needs to be done. Pace yourself, because you're in this for the long run. It's exactly the same way where a marathon runner does not sprint, because a marathon runner cannot sprint for 26 miles. You have to pace yourself. So that's the lesson for life, is like, you want to make the full marathon. You don't want to make it a mile and then, you don't get to, you finish the race. You don't finish the race. You get pulled out early.
Even like if I'm home and I at the end of the day, I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Did I do enough? Did I do this? And then I have to stop myself from feeling guilty and go,
Yeah.
It's okay, because I'm used to doing 30 things a day.
Right.
And I am.
It becomes a habit.
Right.
And then I'll have to say, okay, I did 2 things. That's good.
If it's slower, I can be more creative. It's calm. I'm more
Sure.
creative.
Right. One of the things that's helpful, that's been helpful for me, is for me to acknowledge my limitations, and I might have to tell myself, if I were somebody else, I could get away with working more, but I'm not somebody else. I'm me, and I only have so much gas in the gas tank. So it's crazy for me to run out of gas. I need to drive at a pace and engage in the amount of activities that's good for me. And if somebody thinks that I'm somebody different, I'm going to have to, if I need to, maybe I don't need to, but if I need to, I might have to tell them, I'm sorry, I can't be that for you, but I'm somebody else.
Is that Ian's personality as well? And is he learning that he has to do what you're saying that you're doing to slow himself down?
He's a pretty slow and steady
Oh,
person.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
No,
They do. One thing that his generation deals with is they're so connected with the world through the electronics, and that world is very high paced, fast paced, and immersive, and it can really suck you in to this different reality, and you can forget real life. So he has a different set of challenges than I do, because I'm not tempted to play video games. I'm not, but I can understand the attraction to it. But there's a whole generation. It's like it's almost like the games that are out there to play right now would be the equivalent of, we like movies. Movies are something that we can get immersed in, right? Well, think if you could watch a movie and become a character in the movie. That's what these games are now. Mm-hmm. It's so realistic that it can suck you into this alternate reality, And you can live a fantasy world that's not 100% fantasy because you have your other friends that are also, your real life friends are also there. And you're all living this movie in this virtual world. So and how much of that is healthy and how much of that is sustainable and how much of that is just a natural part of us evolving. That's for his generation to figure out.
Did you want to say something?
Sorry, Sybil, go ahead.
I'm saying, like with my job, sometimes I don't know how to say no.
Yeah.
You know, and the people, it's just this, and I will sit there until 2 o'clock in the night trying to please them.
Right.
You know, when I said no, when I'm saying no to them, I'm gonna stop it. They just can't understand. You know, they think it's just this. But that just this they don't understand because some little part of it might be difficult and you spend hours on it.
Right.
And if you charge them, they will say, for what?
Right.
And there are people that just try to suck the life out of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard to know. Sometimes it feels intentional and sometimes it feels like they're just clueless. But yeah, there definitely are some people are takers, not givers.
Yes.
And,
Right.
and that's where boundaries
Yes.
come in.
Yeah.
No, when I
And
say
you have to
no to them, they
protect
just
yourself.
can't understand
Yeah.
why. And it's just
What would help?
And that's
all
the
night trying to figure out what do I do.
that would be in this category of discipline.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do. It's hard to say no. And you will often experience resistance to it. People could even get very upset. But part of the discipline is to say, no, I know what I can do and I know what I can't do, and I cannot do this. My dad used to taught me something. It's funny I think of this. But so I was growing up, so I was still Adventist. And part of being Adventist means if you're going to apply for a job, you need to let people know ahead of time you cannot work from Friday night sundown until Saturday night sundown because it's your Sabbath. And so oftentimes it's encouraged when you're applying for your first jobs to let people know, I would like to do this job. I'm happy to work as much as I need to, but I cannot work from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. So my dad told me, use the word can't, not won't. So don't say I will not, but say I cannot.
Yeah.
And so that principle helps in other areas where if somebody's asking something of us to do extra work, to say no, I won't do that is very different than say I'm sorry, I'm not able to do that. And sometimes we feel like we owe an explanation, but the reality is, most of the time we don't owe any kind of an explanation. Sometimes we feel like an explanation would make it easier, but the reality is we don't owe anybody any explanation. We can say, I'm sorry, I cannot do that. And if somebody says, well, why not? I just can't. I'm sorry. And it doesn't have to go, because usually when somebody asks why, they're trying to change your mind. They don't really just want to know why. They're trying to win the argument.
They tell me, you can't stop it. You need to keep your mind going.
Oh, yeah,
so
teach
need
you.
to keep doing a little. When I say I'm stopping it because it's in the house. It's not like I have a shop anymore. I say it's in the house, and people keep coming in. Sometimes I want to lay down a little, and they say, "Oh, you can't stop. You have to do a little, and a little is from this one and that one and that one."
Yeah. Well, one of the things we can also share with people is to say, like, I know me better than anybody, and I know I know that I can't do that. You can. I don't even feel bad apologizing, and I can say I'm sorry, but I can't. And there's nothing wrong with saying like I'm sorry that I can't. But this would be the part of self-discipline. It takes discipline to acknowledge to yourself and to other people what we can and we cannot do. But at the end of the day, it's always going to be to our benefit.
Right, and
Yeah.
if you feel bad, you could just add in, I'm sorry, I'm just not physically able to do that.
I was in a deadline business, and I found that and my husband would, when in the beginning we both did the same work. He later got our writing software. His customers didn't care that he was always late. I made sure I stayed late. You have to realize. So I had to tell myself, I'm the one I have to educate first.
And you have to set your boundaries and for your health and
Yes.
your mental health.
All right, let us finish with Because He Lives. We've been kind of singing this song for Easter, if you've
Okay.
noticed. Keep coming back at the end. We'll sing the last verse and then the chorus. So start at the bottom.
So for
And then one day I'll cross that river, I'll fight life's final war with pain. And then as death gives way to victory, I'll see the lights of glory and I'll know He lives. Because He lives, I can face tomorrow. Because He lives.